Okay, so we are live. So hello, anybody. If anybody's here yet, usually it takes a while for people to trickle in. Um, Most of you know me. I'm Eric from Breaking Moon Books. You're on my channel, so obviously you know who I am. But today I am interviewing Josh Haven, and he is the author of The Siberia Job and the Montevideo. Is that how you say that?
Montevideo.
Montevideo.
Though,
Okay, sorry.
I might actually be saying it wrong. I'm not sure
I
anyone would bother to correct me.
I say a lot of
Uh,
words wrong, so I feel like you're right.
no, I
But
think most book people say a lot of words wrong because we all learned our vocabularies reading books
yeah,
without anyone pronouncing them. So I think everyone who's really into books has like 10 glaring mispronunciations in their
it's
in
okay.
their
Yeah,
lexicons. Yeah.
I do it all the time. But anyways, Josh, why don't you introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are?
Hey, I'm Josh. What's up? Uh, I'm a novelist. I write under two names. Josh Haven is my newer pen name because my second publisher told me I couldn't use my real name, which I was already using for my other series of novels, which are historical fiction set in the Napoleonic Wars. So that's J.H. Gallanter. My name is Josh Haven Gallanter. So so I had to split it up between the two publishers, who actually get along pretty well, but for some reason they thought I couldn't use the same name for both groups
Hmm.
of books. So I still frankly don't understand it. It seems like it would be nice to get the readers from half of my books to read the other half of my books if they like them. But
Yeah.
it's an arcane world publishing. So I do what they tell me. I don't put up much of a fuss. I'm just super agreeable. So
Right on. Okay, so we have Mr. Roro here saying hello. Good
hey Roro, what's
afternoon.
up?
Thanks for dropping by, Roro. Okay, so yeah, first of all, why don't you tell us about the I'm gonna say it wrong again. The Montevideo. No, Montevideo. There we go.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about that book first, and then tell us a little bit about the Siberia job after that?
Well, so the Montevideo Brief, it's the third in this series of books about sort of James Bond and the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, that was how I originally pitched the series, and that's how I've been writing them, which is super fun. I mean, everyone should get a chance to write a series of knockoff James Bond novels at least once before you die. It's like a bucket list thing. But so it's I wrote the first one. The first one was called Hold Fast. I think that came out in 2019. That was my first book, and they signed me for two more after that. So the second one was Captain Gray's Gambit, which is about chess and about the Duke of Angers, who is a fascinating historical character. Who I don't want to spoil the ending, but the ending of that book leads into the first scene of War and Peace by Tolstoy, which was an accident, but it just his narrative of the Napoleonic Wars starts like page and line exactly where Captain Gray's Gambit ends.
Oh,
The book was
interesting.
supposed to be called Gambit, by the way, which is a way better title. But then the Queen's Gambit came out like uh,
Yeah.
2 weeks before the cover was set. They're like, "Oh, we have to change this," and I was like, "Okay, we'll change it, not to something stupid." And they were like, "No, too late. Captain Gray's Gambit. We already changed it, so you're stuck with that forever." But it's still it's a really I love that book personally
Mhm.
among my books. And that was so much fun. I got to work right away on the third one. And so for the second one, I indulged a lot in writing about chess, which I'd always wanted to do a chess book. And I realized that for these books, I could sort of indulge all of my historical interests from the Napoleonic era, not just specifically related to the war, but related to everything that was going on. It was the Enlightenment. It was beginning of the Steam Age, almost coming up to the real Industrial Revolution. It's a fascinating time. It was also the time when Haydn was composing, Mozart had just died, Beethoven was just ascending in Europe. So the book opens with the debut of the Eroica Symphony, which is the end of the Baroque age of music and the beginning of the Romantic age of music. Tremendous piece of art that no one had ever heard anything like it. The reception it got was not very excited. The audience had no idea what they were listening to because it was so different from any piece of music that had ever been written before. But that's the opening scene of the book, where the main character, Captain Gray, is meeting covertly with a Spanish diplomat who's also been invited to this concert, who is disclosing to him the terms of a secret treaty between Spain and France, which is a real secret treaty between Spain and France that dictated the terms of Spain entering the Napoleonic War on France's side. At this point, in 1804, Spain was officially neutral. And that was a big deal because, your three major naval powers in the world were Spain, France, and Britain. And Britain was holding its own against France. But if Spain were to come into the war on France's side, it would really change the balance of power considerably. And what was outlined in the secret treaty, the San Ildefonso Treaty, was that Spain would enter the war on France's side in exchange for France not invading them, which Napoleon threatened to do. But they were going to wait until the final treasure armada from South America left Montevideo and arrived in Madrid, and into their bank account, so they could spend it on, it drove their economy, and it was also the money they needed to prosecute the war if they were going to enter it. And pardon me, all this is strictly historical. It was the last of the famous treasure armadas that left South America. It was 4 ships filled to the brim with gold and silver. And Britain realized that the only way they were going to survive Spain's entry into the war is if they could stop those ships from reaching Spain. And so that's the subject of the book. And you've got some good pirate stuff. You got some good sneaking around stuff, all very closely based on historical fact. To get to Montevideo from Europe, you go along the coast of Brazil, where pirates were all over the place in 1803. It was a good year for pirates, really. That's not true. It was actually a terrible year for pirates because it was the same time that the United States launched its war on piracy, which started in North Africa with the Berber states, which is where the book opens, along with the Montevideo, along with the Aroca Symphony. But they were still running pretty wild in the Caribbean and along the Brazilian coast. And the United States, it's sort of like the original War on Terror. After the United States declared independence from Britain, they realized that they were no longer beneficiaries of the protection of the British Navy. It used to be that American ships could go anywhere without having to worry about pirates, because if you attacked a British flagged ship as a pirate, the British Navy would just come in and destroy everything you loved and everyone you had ever met. It would be a very, very harsh retribution for piracy.
Yeah, sounds like it.
So then America was like, oh, we're going to be neutral. We're going to be friends with everyone. We don't have a navy. And so the pirates were like, that sounds awesome. We're going to start robbing all of your ships and taking all of the crews as slaves and selling them in South America, which is exactly what they did. And so the American Thomas Jefferson and the American government decided that they needed a navy. So they built 6 frigates, one of which was the U.S. Constitution, the USS Constitution. The very famous old Ironsides. That's 6 frigates, and they just went around the world raiding pirate colonies and destroying their ships and telling them to stop being, to get real jobs. It's like, stop being pirates and go out and get a real job, pirates. Stop being jerks. And so that's sort of the B plot of the book. The Captain Gray gets involved in the American anti-piracy effort in South America after his own ship is attacked by pirates. So it's I'm trying not to give away too much of the plot, but it's just an awesome book. I mean, is it the greatest book ever written? I'll leave that for historians to decide for sure, but it's a really good one.
I mean, it has pirates and espionage, so it sounds pretty good to me already.
Yeah. And Beethoven. I mean, Beethoven is a character in the book, which is, by the way, it was so much fun writing that, because everything about Beethoven I got from the diary of his private secretary, Ferdinand Ries, who wrote extensively about all of this, about the debut of the Aroca Symphony and about what Beethoven was like in private life. He was a very ornery fellow. He was super argumentative about everything with everyone. Mm-hmm. But also, a tremendous genius who everyone respected greatly. And then you had Haydn, who is sort of his mentor, who was like the nicest guy in the world. Everyone loved Haydn. The only person he ever argued with was Beethoven. His nickname for Beethoven was the Big Shot. But he was a huge admirer of Beethoven, and they reconciled just before Haydn's death, which was nice. Haydn was at this concert, and he makes a little cameo appearance in the book, which is also super fun. So if you like classical music or pirates or spy stuff or just really beautiful poetic writing, this is the book for you.
Right on. Well, we have Jordan here saying, "Not my usual genre, but damn, am I interested in reading this book series?" So,
Jordan, you sound like a wise and perceptive man.
right
I would
on.
strongly recommend it, and I like your thumbnail. You look like a sharp dressed man ready
Let's
to
bring
get
that back
into his
up.
historical fiction.
And he's got some beer in that thumbnail too. That's nice.
A discerning individual.
Right on. Okay, so that actually, one of my questions that I ask was kind of like answered there, because one of my questions that I do ask is, where do you draw your inspiration from? And you just kind of answered that you had inspiration for one of your characters from direct, like, other novels that were related to it. So that's cool. Do you want to like expand on that a little bit more if you have?
Yeah. Well, I was telling you in the chat before the thing started. Backstage, guys. Sorry you weren't invited. It was super exclusive. But in our backstage chat before this started, I back before I sold my first book, and when I was unemployed and looking into getting a commercial truck driving license because I needed a job. I had been writing art reviews for a magazine which folded, so I was out of work. And so I had no money, so I did things like taking dates to yard sales, which is it's a cute date when you're in your 20s. I'm not sure I could pull that off anymore at this point. I think I have to like spring for coffee at least. But I took a date to a yard sale, and I saw a copy of Goldfinger from the 60s. It was a now in theaters paperback, big picture of Sean Connery on the cover. It was Walt Goldfinger, one of the greatest original James Bond movies was in theaters. And I was just looking at this paperback, and I've been reading Patrick O'Brien's Master and Commander series, the Aubrey Maturin series, which I love. They're my favorite books. And I was thinking someone should do that and this simultaneously. These are two great tastes that would taste great together. And so I went home and I wrote Hold Fast, which was the first book. And at that time, I really needed a job. So I gave myself 6 months to write and sell the book, or I was going to become a truck driver. And so I knocked it out pretty quickly, and I just started emailing it to agents. And my now agent read it and loved it and sold it pretty quickly. And my editor, my publisher at Norton, and my editor, Star Lawrence, was the editor of the Patrick O'Brien books, the publisher of the Patrick O'Brien books, and the editor, which was super cool. It's like selling a car design and finding out that Enzo Ferrari is the guy who bought it and is going to edit it for you. He's going to tweak it. And Star Lawrence is one of the legendary editors. He edited The Perfect Storm, Moneyball, The Big Short, and the Patrick O'Brien books, among others.
Wow.
So that was huge for me. So like for going from like truck driver, about to become a truck driver, to selling this book to have Star Lawrence edit it was a pretty dramatic change in my life. So I not a day goes by where I don't think about how lucky that was and how lucky I am in general. Very grateful for that. But that was the inspiration, and I had so much fun writing Hold Fast, and they, were excited for me to do more books, so I went right into writing the second one, which I finished before the first one even came out, and then right into writing Montevideo Brief. So yeah.
No, that's very cool. I've actually, the only one I've read by Ian Fleming, I think, was Casino Royale, because my cousin lent me like a copy. So I did read that novel, but I definitely grew up on watching all those James Bond movies. My personal favorite is probably Thunderball with Sean Connery. That one.
Mine too. And I have the perfect story for that, segueing into the Siberia job. Though I do want to say, Casino Royale, by far the worst of his novels. It was his first one. It's only like 40,000 words. He hadn't really figured it out yet. Read the other ones. I think Moonraker is the best. Way better than the movie. I mean, I like the movie. It's just the movie is kind of a little on the silly side going to space. The novel is much more grounded, and
Yeah.
it's a really good novel. Actually, I think it's probably his best. But anyway, so with Siberia Job, Hold Fast had just come out, and my agent got contacted by another agent named Tom Jenks. He's not an agent. He's an editor.
Mhm.
He actually edited Hemingway's last book. Tom Jenks had been contacted by a friend of his named John Kleinheinz, who was interested in telling his story to someone who might be interested in writing a book about it.
Okay.
Which became the Siberia Job. But I mention this because while I was researching this book, I went out and met with him at his house in the Bahamas, where he lived 2 doors down from Sean Connery, which was really cool. But also much more interesting than that is actually, boy, I shouldn't have said that. No one look up his address. It's not literally 2 doors. It's a little further away, but he lives close to Sean Connery. And then, but nearby is actually the house from Thunderball, Palmyra, where they had the Shark Tank, and
Cool.
it's a derelict. The house is completely abandoned. And so I asked him, how is it possible? It's a super famous house. It's on the beach. It's in the Bahamas. It's a 5-minute drive from like the largest casino in the Bahamas. But it's totally abandoned. And he was like, oh, this is a really bad neighborhood. And I was like, how could it be a bad neighborhood? It's right on the beach. It's like, this is like the murder capital of the Western Hemisphere around here.
Oh, yikes.
It's like, what makes this a good neighborhood is if you have like really good security, which was kind of weird. But so he's always game for a good time. So he snuck into Palmyra through a broken fence. And the shark pool is still there, exactly the way it looks in the movie. It's empty. There were no sharks in it or water. But and the swimming pool where Domino swims and then James Bond Sean Connery gets covered by the metal thing. That's all there.
Yeah.
The little ledge where they shoot trap. Everything. It's just like the movies. It was just like the coolest day of my life. And that day was the day I sold my previous Josh Haven novel, which is called Fake Money, Blue Smoke. And so that's actually why we went, because I was there. I was researching the book, and I got this email from my agent. It's like Auto Penciler is going to publish Fake Money. And I was like, hey, John, guess what happened? I've got this other book coming out. And he's like, hey, we should go celebrate. What do you want to do? And I was like, let's sneak into an abandoned house that was in an old James Bond movie. And he was like, that sounds awesome. Let's go do it. So
that does.
So that's
awesome.
how that happened. But
very cool.
I love Thunderball. So,
right on. No, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to give a little bit of a synopsis about the Siberia Job then? We'll jump into that.
Yeah, so the Siberia Job is closely based on real events. The reason the reason John was interested in it's being done as a novel instead of a memoir is because a lot of people connected with the events of the book have been murdered. A half dozen in the last 12 months. Because it's connected to the Russian oil industry. And so a lot of these guys who've, fallen out of windows or, beaten themselves severely and then hanged themselves or shot themselves in the head 3 or 4 times. A lot of these guys connected to the Russian energy industry are dead. So people didn't want their real names in the book by and large or identifiable stuff. So I fictionalized it lightly. Tightened it up because it happened over a larger time frame. But basically, the story is about how this guy, John Kleinheinz, and another Czech businessman named Peter, last name redacted, went into Russia in the 90s when they were transitioning from a communist state ownership of industry into a free market economy where all of the nationalized industries were being privatized. Now, there were rules to make sure that these properties stayed within Russian ownership, stayed within Russia, that they were owned by Russians. But the government of Russia were gaming the system so that they personally would own these companies. And that was sort of the birth of the Russian oligarchy. And so this Czech guy the Czech Republic had just done the same thing in privatizing their formerly communist industries. They did it in a little more organized way. But this guy, Peter, had decided to, gather together some investors and dump a lot of money into buying up vouchers. The way the system worked was every Czech citizen got a voucher for ownership of a nationalized company that was being privatized, and they could go to these voucher auctions and convert their vouchers into stock in these now private industries. But with a recently communist country, no one really cared about vouchers. What they cared about was hard currency. They needed actual money to buy groceries and, just survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so this fellow Peter, he raised some money. I think it was in England, and bought up. He just went around the country buying up people's vouchers. And so they got money, which they needed. It was worth a lot more to them than the paper vouchers. He got all these vouchers, and then he converted them into like massive ownership shares in these companies. And then the companies eventually became negotiable internationally on international Western European stock markets. And then he sold out for a gigantic profit. And so he and John met, and they talked about doing this in Russia. There were serious concerns about doing it in Russia because Russia was, the Czech Republic is a tiny country with a basically homogenous population, low crime rate, low black market presence, low mafia presence. Russia is a gigantic country. It's the largest country in the world. It's a federation of a lot of different states. People think of Russians as just being Russians, but in fact, Russian is just one ethnicity, which is in a very multicultural federal country. It's sort of more like the European Union than it is like, France.
Yeah.
But France is a bad example because it's kind of, it's got Brittany and Normandy and separate regions too. But it's more like England. It's more like the United Kingdom than it's like England. So you've got Russians who are the dominant group in the West, but then the rest of the country, you've got all sorts of Siberian ethnic groups, and you've got Georgians and Kazakhs and Tartars and the Jews, where there was a Jewish autonomous oblast in eastern Russia, and Kuchkis, and they're just the Uzbeks, Tajiks, and so it was the only way Russia was held together was by an extremely strong dictatorial leader, which is why the Tsar was able to hold the empire together, and then the communist dictators were able to hold the empire together. When communism ended, the country began to splinter, and of course, now you have a lot of independent states that used to be part of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, and so forth. But so the country was in an extremely chaotic period. There was really no law and order. It was like the Wild West. It was like Deadwood, but if Deadwood covered the entire North American continent.
Mm-hmm.
So Western investors were very reluctant to go into Russia because they were worried. They had legitimate fears that they might be murdered if they went there and tried to do business. And some of them were. But John is a very industrious fellow, and so is this Czech guy, Peter. And they decided they would take a shot. So they went in and they just started, they brought American money in with them, which was desperately needed by Russians, where the inflation rate for the ruble was just absurd. It was basically worthless. It was like Germany in the 30s. And so all these Russian citizens had gotten these paper vouchers from the central government, which were totally worthless to them. They were desperate for hard currency. So John and Peter went around trading American money for these vouchers. And it started off going kind of badly because they got very large shares in a couple of companies. They got one in a tobacco company that was the largest tobacco. I think it was the largest tobacco company in Russia. And as soon as they took ownership, the guys were like, "Okay, this is super exciting. We have American partners. We are the mafia. You're going to help us get into the United States now, and you're going to help legitimize our business." And they're like, "Oh, you're the mafia? We actually don't want to be involved in this business." So they just gave their shares away for nothing. Then they did the same thing with a chocolate company, and the chocolate guys, who seemed like they should be nice, wanted them to sell. And so they sent a representative to the meeting, to this negotiation about selling John and Peter's stock in a butcher jacket covered in blood, carrying a butcher knife, to try to persuade them to sell, which was actually a pretty persuasive negotiation technique. So this thing started out not going too well, but they found out that one of the Russian energy industries, a natural gas company, which is called Gazneft in the book, so people wouldn't think it was one specific company, because all Russian energy companies have either gas or neft in the title. The two big ones obviously are Gazprom and Rosneft, but there are a number of others.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so they found out that this company, Gazneft, was going to privatize, but the owners, the then managers of the company, wanted to become the owners of the company. So they were hiding the auctions, the voucher auctions, all over the country in very remote locations. and trying to prevent people from going to them. And so John and Peter had this idea that if they could actually manage to get to these auctions, not only would they be able to convert their vouchers into ownership in this company, they would get gigantic portions of the company because no one else was going to be able to make it to these auctions. So the story is kind of about how they managed to get to these secret auctions despite huge obstacles being put in their ways, huge obstacles like tanks and walls of tires being set on fire and death threats. And without spoiling the ending, the reason that John wanted to tell this story now is because Peter, the real life Peter, the guy who the Peter in the book is based on, died very suspiciously right around the time my first book, Hold Fast, came out. John read Hold Fast. He really liked it. That's why he wanted to talk to me. But he also wanted to talk to me because Peter, who's the only guy who still really knew this whole story, had just died in a helicopter crash under somewhat mysterious circumstances. It's not clear if he was murdered or if he died in a helicopter accident. I mean, people do die at helicopter accidents, but there was kind of a weird situation. The scene was cleared before the police could investigate. The bodies were all moved. All of the other helicopters had been brought in for the day because of a bad weather warning, except his. So, and no one will talk about it theoretically because there's litigation going on. So it was a little mysterious. And so John figured, well, I guess I'll try to get this story out there while I'm still alive. And so about halfway through the writing process, we were chatting and I was like, so John, am I going to get murdered after this book comes out? And he's like, no, almost definitely not. It's like, oh, almost definitely not. That sounds good. And he's like, Americans almost never get killed. It's certainly not like the writers, the journalists. I mean, an American journalist hasn't been killed in Russia since, so that was the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And it's like, John, none of this is reassuring me at all. This is terrible. And then he's like, have you read The Ghostwriter? That's about a guy who writes a political memoir and gets murdered. And I was like, John, what are you doing to me right now? This is terrible. It's like, I'm too far into this to give up the subject.
Yeah.
So anyways, it was a super fun book to write, and it's a very interesting subject. And it's basically, a true story that lends itself remarkably well to being a novel because the real story is so absurdly exciting and just absolutely wild. So I strongly recommend that one too.
Okay, so yeah, for anybody that's watching, the links to these two books are in the description of this video. Also, I wanted to put it out there, if you guys have any questions for Josh about his books or just writing in general, definitely put those in the chat and we'll try.
Or like, fashion tips or whatever. I'm a font of information.
Yeah, if you have any question for Josh, any question whatsoever, put it in the chat. Okay, so I have a question for you. Jumping into more your taste in books, do you have a favorite book of 2023 so far that you have read?
Of 2023? I just started the new Ruth Ware book, The It Girl, and I'm not through with it yet, but I'm about halfway through, and I love Ruth Ware. I love her sort of modern Agatha Christie suspense, whodunit sort of murder. So I think that's probably in the lead right now. If you exclude my own books, which are just both awesome, and I just love rereading them because they're different every time. There's the Nelson DeMille's The Maze. It's fantastic. I love Nelson DeMille, and he wrote, totally unconnected to my liking him, he wrote a really nice blurb for the Siberia job. So if you're a Nelson DeMille fan, he endorses this book, and I endorse him. I'm not sure those are equally valuable, but I think it's probably going to be The It Girl. But there's a new Lisa Jewell book that I'm reading. I can't think of the name of it. Lisa Jewell's another sort of murder mystery writer. What was the name of her new book? Not The Invisible Girl. It's not Then She Was Gone.
I can see the cover in my head though. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
But I think the best recent book that I've read, and this is recent in a kind of not so recent, but it's new to me because I only just read it, was The Martian, which is fantastic. It's so good. It's, for years I've been telling people when they ask me about books is that, there are 4 perfect thrillers. which is Angels and Demons, The Da Vinci Code, Jurassic Park, and The Hunt for Red October. But I'm seriously considering adding The Martian to that list because it is just the perfect thriller. Andy Weir never sets a foot wrong in that book. It's so entertaining.
Yeah.
I don't think I put it down from the time I started reading it. I just, so all-consuming. And a pretty good movie, too, by the
Yeah.
way.
I read that book for a book club like a couple years ago, and it was fantastic. I just like
Yeah.
I love how humorous his writing is. Like he makes science funny in like a very dire situation. He still manages to like be sarcastic and make you laugh, even though you know like he's in a bad situation.
Yeah, it's he's a fantastic writer, and there hasn't really been a great like hard science fiction writer since Michael Crichton died. At least not one that I can think of. Correct me if I'm missing someone, but I was a huge Michael Crichton fan, and he
Yeah.
died when I was a freshman in college. I remember that being like the first exterior death, like outside of friends and relatives, that had seriously affected me. I was so bummed by his death, and then it's nice to have Andy Weir sort of taking up that mantle now.
Mm-hmm. Have you read anything by Blake Crouch?
No, but I like the name.
Yeah, so his he has a book called Dark Matter that is very fun, and another one called Recursion. Um, I would strongly recommend those two books. They're
Dark Matter Recursion.
yeah, they're kind of like they're sci-fi, but they're on like a vein of like sci-fi thrillers, I would say.
I love a good sci-fi thriller.
Okay.
There are not enough of them. I will definitely check those out.
Yeah. Jordan says The Martian and Project Hail Mary are both phenomenal books. Looking forward to Project Hail Mary becoming a movie.
Yeah, I haven't read PHM yet, but now that I've finished with The Martian, it's at the top of the list going forward.
Yeah, I have read that one and I also recommend it. It was a lot of fun. Definitely took a twist I wasn't expecting, but I was here for it. Okay.
Love a good twist.
Let me see here with my pile of questions. Um, okay, so I'm assuming you know what a TBR pile is.
No.
Okay, so it is an acronym in like the booktube world. TBR means to be read. So if you had a to be read pile, how many books would you say is in your TBR?
Oh my God, hundreds, literally hundreds. Honestly, maybe thousands. My favorite thing to do is to go to library book sales and buy everything. It's
Yeah.
when I was growing up, and still, and I grew up in Connecticut. I live in Florida now, but I still go back every year in mid-June for my local library book sale. So they have 3 days, and the first day it's all the books are really cheap, and the second day the books are a little cheaper, and then on the third day, $5, all the books you can carry. Just buy hundreds of books during that sale, and I still do. And so I have, I've got, books about Stickley furniture and interior design, and memoirs like Leslie Caron's memoir about doing musicals in Hollywood in the 50s. And, discussions about the first scientific exploration of northern Canada, and the history of beaver production in North America, and archaeological excavations in the Near East in the late 19th century. And just, I love all that stuff, and I accumulate it. So I have a very, very big to be read pile. Though right now, at the top of the to be read pile is Anthony Trollope, the 19th century novelist. I started with his novel Dr. Thorne, which my brother had been recommending to me for a while. And it's a little later than I'm more of a Napoleonic guy than a Victorian guy. But I finally gave in and read that, and it was so good, so good. Trollope is an absolute master of everything, and novel wise, of characterization, of humor, of plot, of just light, springy prose. Just pulls you along, and so they're your standard British sort of rural landed gentry daughters marrying for money or love type books, but they're so brilliantly written. Jane Austen level stuff. And of course, Jane Austen is sort of the great tragedy of novels because, she's sort of the Mozart of novels. She was very young when she died and didn't write, unlike Mozart, who was unbelievably prolific, she didn't write that many novels. But Trollope did. To keep myself productive, I write 1,000 words every day, and it's my full-time job. Trollope woke up at 5 every morning and wrote 6,000 words before he went to his full-time job, which was as a bureaucrat in the British Postal Service. So he wrote like 45 novels. So far, I've read like 8 of them in the last 3 months, and they keep getting better. I can't put them down. So right now, that's sort of wiped off everything else in my immediate to-be-read pile because they're so good. And I can't believe he's not better known. I mean, obviously, he is reasonably well known. I know that Julian Fellows, who did Downton Abbey and Gosford Park, did a Dr. Thorne miniseries a couple years ago that I haven't seen, but we'll probably check out at some point after I get through my entire to-be-read pile. But so I'm glad maybe Trollope is going to have a little bit of a resurgence, but boy, I very strongly recommend going back. And start with Dr. Thorne, which I actually think was the best one that I've read so far, but they're all really, really good.
Okay, well, yeah, that sounds good. And now, when you're talking to people about what books you're reading, you can say you're adding it to your TBR, and they'll be like,
yeah. I always love a good new acronym.
There you go.
I have a friend of mine who I went to college with who's a little more in touch with the young people than I am. So I have to check in with her like once or twice a week to find out what something means. Like, Sarah, what does Riz mean? People keep saying Riz. What the hell? Like, what does Finna mean? So
I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know what those mean either. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah. Young people, youths. What's wrong with them?
Okay, so I'm curious to know, when did you start writing?
When did I start writing? Well, when I was in high school, there was a one-act play festival, and there was this girl who was in the theater crowd in school, who I really wanted to go out with, and so I decided I was going to write a play to impress her, and I did, and it worked. And we dated for a long time. We dated off and on for years after that, and we're still very close. So writing to impress girls totally works. That's how I got it. That's literally how I got into writing. So I wrote this play for the One Act Play Festival, and I got chosen to be performed along with a couple other one acts, and that was a lot of fun. And then so I had this play. And I wasn't sure if I was going to go to college, but there was this program at NYU for playwriting. And I thought, well, I've always been a big fan of I don't know if you've read Moss Hart's memoir, Act One, about how he became a playwright. It is the most entertaining memoir I've ever read by far. I very strongly recommend it. Top 5 books all time for me, definitely. Act One by Moss Hart. And so it was about being a playwright in New York City. And so I thought, well, I've just written this play. That was pretty fun. I thought it'd be fun to live in Greenwich Village for a few years. So I applied to the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, kind of on a whim, and they accepted me. And I went and did that. So I was planning to become a playwright. And so I wrote a lot of plays for 4 years. And it turns out you can't earn a living as a playwright. Literally no one does it. Maybe, what's his name? Mamet is probably the only guy in the country who actually earns a living as a playwright. So then I had to transition to other stuff. And I wrote a spec script of 30 Rock, which was still on the air when I was in school. And a friend of mine, his girlfriend worked at Broadway Video, which is the production company of 30 Rock and Saturday Night Live and the Jimmy Fallon Show, Late Night with Jimmy Fallon.
Oh, cool.
As it then was, and the Tonight Show. And so he read my spec script of 30 Rock and he showed it to his girlfriend. And she called me and she's like, Josh, I just read your script. Like, this is really good. Would you like sorry, I shouldn't have made that sound quite so self-complimentary. She was like, Josh, this is fine, whatever. But would you like me to try to get you an internship at 30 Rock? And I said, absolutely, that would be awesome. Please do that. And so she called me back the next day and she's like, sorry, 30 Rock has hired all of their interns for this year. But how about Jimmy Fallon? Because they've still got an empty slot. And I was like, oh, yeah, absolutely. That would be lots of fun. That would mean actually working in 30 Rock, 30 Rockefeller Center, which is where they shoot the late night show. And so I went and did that, which was just the most fun ever. I don't know. There's been a lot of stuff about Jimmy in the news lately about his being a bad boss and being a jerk. And I wrote to the New York Post who wrote a story about that. And I was just like, I worked for Jimmy for a year back when it was still late night instead of the Tonight Show. And he is just the nicest guy. He was always lovely to everyone. I never saw him. I know, obviously, I was an intern. I was at the very lowest rung of the chain. But he was just a genuinely very nice guy. It's like I remember a couple interns were trying to get a giant glass water bottle into the water cooler, and he like jogged over to help them, which is not something I just remember seeing him do that. It's like, wow, that's like an actual human being thing to do, not a celebrity thing to do.
Yeah.
And just he was always very friendly, and I had a blast working there. But one of the things about working there is a lot of people wanted to get their people onto the show. And so a lot of free stuff was sent to the show, you know, screeners for movies and TV shows, but also a lot of books because publishers were trying to get authors onto the show as guests. So far as I know, they have never had an author on. At least they didn't have one on while I was there. So all of the books that were sent to the show would go into this big free stuff bin. The free stuff bin was for anyone who worked there who wanted to take something to just take it.
Yeah.
I took a lot of stuff from the free stuff bin. I was a little out of pocket in those days, so it was a good way to. I got an absinthe fountain. Someone sent a gigantic, like chandelier-sized absinthe fountain, like the sort of thing you'd see in a Toulouse-Lautrec painting, to the show, and no one wanted it because no one wanted to try to take it home on the subway. And I was like, I am taking that absinthe fountain. That's mine now. And so I went home on the subway with this gigantic thing, but also a lot of books. And so every day I would go there and I would just take all the new books and I would take them home and read them and write reviews of them and send them to every place that ran book reviews. And one of them got published, and then a couple more got published. And then one of the magazines that was publishing them, which was the Weekly Standard, which no longer exists, offered me sort of like a semi-freelance job of reviewing books and then eventually art shows. And that's how I got into professional writing. And then they folded, and I spent a few years in science. I wrote some papers about. I wrote a paper about dark matter, actually. Cool. Which actually was arguing that dark matter doesn't exist. It was a model of cosmology where dark matter is kind of stupid. It's a mathematical fiction. It makes the equation work. Like someone looked at the universe and said, 1 doesn't equal 2, so we need to add something to the other side of the equation. So 1 plus dark matter equals 2. That's what dark matter is. And so I came up with a model for cosmology. This sounds so pretentious, but this is what happened. I came up with a model that didn't require dark matter to make the math work. It required like stupid, absurd math to work, but it worked without inventing dark matter. And I sent that to a few physics departments, and I got a couple like very nice letters back saying that this is super interesting. We should look into this. And I got a couple really nasty letters back, like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, mind your own business. No one gives a shit what some playwright thinks about you. At this time, I had a playwriting degree. I didn't even have a bachelor's degree in science, much less a master's degree or PhD. And so I got mixed responses. And I wrote some papers about planetary astrophysics. I wrote a paper about Saturn's moon Hyperion, which got very nice responses from the geophysics community. Turns out geophysicists way nicer than your like quantum mechanicists, just from my personal experience. But and I wrote a paper about Proteus, which is one of Neptune's moons, and a paper about our moon. And so I thought I would go into astrophysics as a career, and I got into 0 graduate schools because the only thing I had on my resume were these papers, which I had written sort of just as a lark, and a playwriting degree, and some time working for Jimmy Fallon. And it turns out that the graduate schools want more than that. I did get waitlisted at Cal Berkeley, which it just makes me love them forever. So go Golden Bears. But and so I didn't get into graduate school. I didn't have a job writing anymore. And so I was like, I need a job. I'm going to become a truck driver. And then that brings us back to where the story started with writing the first novel.
Right on.
I don't
Yeah,
even remember what the question was. I've just been
the
talking
question
about my
was, when
life
did you
for.
start writing?
Anyways,
So
yeah. So
you
I
answered it
started
quite well.
to impress a girl in high school.
Yeah, no,
No
no, that's
regrets.
I was actually gonna ask you about the Jimmy Fallon thing because I had read your like author bio for your books on like the publisher's website.
Yeah, that's is that the one that mentions Saturn and Hyperion? So I know
No, it doesn't mention that there at all.
I have a few bios circulating because I don't send them out. But at one
Mhm.
point, I wrote one for a joke that was just about me being an astrophysicist and sent it to my agent, and he sent it to someone, and now it's on like some publicity materials, like, oh, Josh Glaringer is a genius astrophysicist who like writes in his spare time. It's like, no, that was a joke. Please don't ever use that again. But yeah, no, one of my publishers, Norton, keeps making me change my bio because they don't think I'm funny. My first bio was just like, Josh Glaringer is a novelist and 5-time Super Bowl MVP. And that was what it said for, it was like a month on Amazon. And I got a call from my publisher, like, no, you have to change that. This is historical fiction. This is not puerile comedy. And so I changed it to Josh Glaringer is a novelist and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they didn't think that was funny either. And so now it's just Josh Glaringer is a novelist and like the nicest guy ever. And they keep trying to make me change that one. They've asked me several times. But I get really positive feedback about that. For some reason, people like that bio. And like it's like not exactly fan letters, but I get emails from people just like, oh, I saw you're like the nicest guy ever. And I'm like, yes, that's me. That you found the correct person. So
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, that's I don't remember what the question was. I get off on these little tangents.
No, it's great.
It's that's one of the things that makes writing fun is you can do that professionally.
Yeah, I mean, you end up answering like a bunch of other questions I was gonna ask anyway, so it's perfect. Like you just did it all at once. Um, okay, just looking back at my questions here. Yeah, you have answered quite a few of them. Okay, so just a couple more before we wrap up is I was curious if you had a favorite reading spot.
Huh. Um, I mean, it's I don't want to be lame and say in bed, which
That
is
is,
honestly where I do most of my reading. I love reading outside. When I was growing up, my house was over super noisy, and so
mhm,
I would go outside to read and to write. I do most of my writing outside,
mhm.
um, which is one of the reasons I wanted to move to Miami because the weather is always perfect, and I get rained on for 20 minutes every day, but then the rest of the day is super nice. So I just sit outside and like write looking at the beach, which is the best. But I used to write just sitting in the forest in Connecticut,
Mhm.
where it was mostly quiet. One time I was sitting on like this little porch with some bird feeders on it out in the forest in Connecticut, and a black bear walked up to me. He walked across the stream, and I didn't notice him walking across the stream, but he shook himself dry like a gigantic dog, which
Yeah.
was hilarious and a little frightening at the same time because he was a black bear. I was like, oh, well, this is weird. What am I going to do? I should have got a gun. But and so he started climbing. I have a video of this because you can't take out a gun. You have to take out your phone. There's no alternative. So he started climbing up onto this wooden platform I was sitting on with the bird feeders because bears love bird feeders and novelists probably. Um, but then my phone rang and he ran away. So it's just like every time I get annoyed by my phone ringing, I'm like, save me from a bear, so we're even.
Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, those are actually like black bears are pretty common here. We see them quite often. Like I've had neighbors drive down my road and be like, "Hey, just so you know, there's a black bear down the street, so keep your eye out." Because I was like mowing my lawn, and they're like, "Yeah, just watch. Make sure that if you see it, go inside."
Yeah, they have become pretty common in Connecticut, but only in the last 5 or 10 years. There weren't any when I was growing up, but
Mhm.
then like around the time I was in college, they started just appearing. So I guess whatever um, anti-extinction program, rehabilitation, rewilding stuff they've been doing in Connecticut and New Jersey has been super effective. No one's been eaten yet. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, I was dropping a manuscript off at Star Lawrence's house. He lives in Connecticut,
Mhm.
and there I was driving up this dirt road in northern Connecticut, and I saw a black bear scurry across the road, and it was a little black bear, and then a little further down the road was a mother and two other little black bears. And so I drop off the manuscript, and I'm driving back, and there are two bicyclists on the side of the road. And I was like, oh, I should warn them that they're riding towards black bears. So I pulled over, and I tried to get their attention, and they would not talk to me because it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and everyone was terrified. They're like, just like putting up their hands, like, don't come near me. We're not going to stop. We're not going to talk to you. So I tried 3 times to like pull over in front of them and tell them about the black bears. And they just kept like turning to go around me. It's like, okay, you know what? Get eaten. And then as soon as that happened, I felt bad. So I went after them again, but they had already passed the bears, and the bears weren't there anymore. So closest I've ever come to letting someone be eaten. But you know, if you're on a dirt road in a forest and someone is trying to like get your attention, you should listen, because you don't know what's out there. Just as a general rule, even if it's at the beginning of a pandemic. So,
fair. Yeah. Jordan's comment is, note to self: keep ringer on when relaxing outdoors.
Yes, or set up a bear alarm. I don't know. Probably one of these new AI models could just tell you when bears are going and go off. Yeah, bears hate ringtones. It's lucky. When I was in college, I set a Beatles song as a ringtone for a while, from "Baby Drive My Car" at the very end where they say beep 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 beep. Yeah, I thought that would be a funny ringtone back when I was 18 and even more childish than I am now. And it made me hate the song completely, but I bet that probably wouldn't have scared him away, because bears probably love the Beatles. Everyone does, but my really annoying current ringtone was enough to scare him away. So Jordan, that's a insider tip for bear scaring.
Okay, so I have one more question before we wrap up. This has been a delightful interview.
Thank you. For me too.
My last question is, if you were a book title, what would your book title be? Oh, and also to the previous question about your favorite reading spot being your bed, that is like the most common answer amongst all authors I've interviewed. They usually say their bed. So
yeah, well, it's
pretty common.
I've got to rotate my mattress every few months so I don't get like that reading dent, when you read in the same place for too long. Book title. If I were a book title, am I coming up with a book title, or am I using an existing book title? Because my first thought is obviously The It Girl by Ruth Ware. But
okay.
No. Boy.
It can be anything. Like sometimes one author was like, they looked me dead in the face and they said chaos. So like it could be anything. I'm also putting you on the spot trying to like think of something right now, so that's okay if you can't.
I mean, this is interesting. What other answers have authors given to this?
So chaos is the one that I remember the most. Another one was dazed and confused. Another one I think was the never-ending struggle. So like they're all kind of along that line. I'm still waiting for one to be more cheery.
Yeah. I'm just gonna go with The It Girl, because that's I'm feeling very cheery right now.
Okay.
That's and I'm looking at it. It's on my bookshelf over here. So that's when you asked me the best book of 2023. It was the first thing that came to mind because it's sitting like 10 feet away from me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Right on. Okay, well, I think with that, we will wrap up. So for anybody still watching, if you guys want to get Josh's books, those 2 links are in the description down below. So definitely go check that out. And yeah, with that, thanks, Josh, for joining me today to do this interview. It was a lot of fun. I got to learn a lot about you and your books.
Thanks. Yeah, this was really fun. I feel like I kind of punted it with the final answer. I'm gonna have to think a little about that. Maybe I'll come up with something.
You can think about it some more if you want, and then go back to this video and put your comment in there, and I'll pin it.
All right. Perfect. Sounds good.
But yeah, no, it was great. And also, for anybody that wants to know how to pick up girls, you just got to write plays now. So there you go.
Yeah, girls or bears.
Or bears. Yeah. Right on. Okay, well, yeah, with that, I'm going to end the stream, but thanks everybody for joining us, and until next time,
thanks for having me.
Keep on reading.
Sorry for cutting off your ending thing. You want to do that again?
No, it's okay. You can say you can say what you're going to say too.
No, I was just thanking you for having me, but it felt like you were doing an end of stream catchphrase that I stepped on.
Yeah, I tend to go keep on reading. I do it all the time. It's all good. They're used to this. All right. With that,